Hello, in this video we're going to start a new topic, which is oscillations. As I've said in the subtitle here, an oscillation is repetitive motion about an equilibrium position. So let's think of possibly the most famous thing that oscillates, a pendulum. We've got some mass on a string here. This pendulum is going to be swinging backwards and forwards. So it's going to start at some high point here. If we've pulled it off to one side, it will swing off to the other side, then it will swing back again, and so on and so on. So we've got repetitive motion because it's going backwards and forwards, and there's going to be some point in the middle here, which is the equilibrium position. And we'll look at that in more detail in a bit. But yeah, there's loads of things that oscillate. I mean, we've got these pendulums, you've got electromagnetic waves, so that include things like alternating current in electricity. You've got a mass on a spring, so if we've got a spring hanging down with a mass on it and you pull the mass down, then it will bob up and down, so that'll oscillate again about an equilibrium position. Strings on a violin, when you start playing that, or on a guitar or any other musical instrument. Sticking with music and other sounds, you've got sound waves. The particles in sound waves will be moving backwards and forwards. Pistons in engines, so we start moving into engineering, even on stuff which is a little bit more maybe, or can be variable and erratic, but is still an oscillation. You're looking at things like heartbeats, the tides in the seas and the oceans, even things like populations of predators and prey in different environments. These things will oscillate, and they'll increase and decrease around some central position. So we need some way of describing all of this. They may oscillate in different ways, but we're going to have terminology that we can use across all descriptions. And then in some cases, we will find that there are simple ways of analysing and describing certain types of oscillation that recur over and over again. So that's what we're going to be looking at through this section. So how do we describe oscillations then? Well, it's all the stuff that you'd expect. Let's go back to the example of the pendulum. If we've got some pendulum that's swinging backwards and forwards, and you were thinking, well, how are you going to describe this to people? Well, I mean, setting aside the specifics of the pendulum is what I'm getting at here, just in terms of the oscillation. So the specifics of the pendulum would be things like, well, how long is it, and how heavy is the mass at the end. So we'd be looking at things like mass or weight of the object at the end and the length of the pendulum. But that's to do with the pendulum rather than the oscillation. So the terminology for the oscillation that we're going to be looking for is, well, where's our equilibrium position? So what point is it oscillating about? How far away is it from the equilibrium position? So that's going to be, you've got the displacement, which is actually, so that is the distance from the equilibrium position. And that is going to be as a function of time because it's moving backwards and forwards. Whereas we can say with the amplitude, this is the maximum displacement off to one side or the other. So this is going to be the magnitude of the maximum displacement because it can be on either side. So how far away can we get away from the equilibrium position? So we've got two ways of measuring stuff here. Saying exactly where the particle is on the pendulum, that is the displacement, and then how far away it could possibly be is the amplitude. So that's describing position. But we also want to know how quickly it's doing all of this. So we might want to know, well, how long does it take to complete one oscillation? So that's the period, which we denote with a capital T. So that would be the period. How long does it take to do one oscillation? Or we might want to know, well, how many oscillations has it done in 1 second, say? So oscillations per unit time. So if we were going to stay in seconds, we put the period in seconds, we put the frequency in seconds to the -1, or hertz is another way of putting that. That's another way of describing the units of seconds to the -1. And pretty much we've described all the things that we want there in terms of position and speed. It's all there because we've got time and we've got distance. So that's going to be able to let us say things about the speed as well. So these are the main bits of terminology that we're going to be using. There is one other thing which is going to come up when we start looking at a specific type of oscillation. So I'll give a little heads up on that in a moment, and that's this idea of angular frequency. Because as we'll see in the next video, there is a strong relationship between oscillations and circular motion. So we're going to be looking at this relationship, which is just swinging backwards and forwards in this case, the same horizontal plane. It's only moving in 2 dimensions here. It's not moving in and out of the screen, say, it's just moving in the plane of the screen, to thinking of the associated circular motion that might be going in the horizontal plane in or out of the screen. So we're going to get this connection between oscillations and circular motion, and that's going to allow us to talk about this thing called angular frequency. But we'll get onto that in the next video. All we're wanting to know at the moment is we've got define where your equilibrium position is, say, give a description of the displacement of the oscillator about the equilibrium position as a function of time. Say the maximum of that is the amplitude, and then how quickly it's performing these oscillations, either in terms of time or the number of oscillations per unit time. So the terminology is relatively straightforward, and it's pretty intuitive. I mean, this is just common sense of if someone had asked you how to describe an oscillation, these would be the sort of things that you'd be saying. So no surprises there.